Faster begins with Jimmy Cullen, a huge and stocky prisoner, staring at a photo of himself and his brother on the prison cell wall. Not long later, a warden arrived and escorted Jimmy out of his cell, since it was his first day of freedom after serving so many years in prison. Before being freed from prison, Jimmy is asked to appear before the warden, who tells him to begin a new chapter in his life by becoming a decent citizen who follows the country's laws and regulations. But Jimmy didn't seem to mind what the man was saying because he just wanted to get out of there. Meanwhile, in another location, a dishonest police officer named Slade Humphreys is spotted dealing with a drug dealer. Humphreys is a drug addict who frequently obtained a supply of illegal narcotics. After being released from prison, Jimmy, dubbed Driver, recovers his 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle, a gun, and the information file of his target. Jimmy accelerated toward his target, Bakersfield, California. Jimmy then entered an office building with steady feet, accompanied by a welling of vengeance, and quickly killed a man whose information was in the file. After killing his first target, Jimmy headed straight to Roy Groen, who gave him the car and rifle. Roy is a dependable informant, and Jimmy coerces the man into providing information about his other targets because this is a revenge mission Jimmy planned while in prison. Roy, who disliked being intimidated, ordered his security to beat Jimmy up. However, when Roy's bodyguard discovers that Jimmy is the Ghost, the most dangerous criminal of his day, they flee, abandoning Roy completely. Roy, desperate and scared of being assassinated, ultimately reveals all of Jimmy's targets. While Jimmy rushes off to find his targets, Humphreys and the detectives begin looking into Jimmy's first murder after his release from jail. Elsewhere, a hitman known as the Killer receives a mission from a client to assassinate Jimmy. Killer instantly accepted the offer and prepared to carry out his goal. During the inquiry, Humphreys linked up with Detective Cicero, a woman who obtained information about the offender, Jimmy. Detective Cicero claimed that Jimmy was involved in a huge robbery and was called a driver due to his excellent driving abilities. When Jimmy and his gang attempted to flee, they were attacked by another group of thieves, who subsequently executed members of Jimmy's crew, including the Huss brother, who was brutally slain right in front of his eyes. Following that, Jimmy was shot in the head. The robbers believed Jimmy had died, but he was rescued by a team of physicians who placed an iron plate on his skull before sending him to prison. Detective Cicero feels that Jimmy may seek vengeance after his release from prison. Meanwhile, Jimmy locates the next target, Kenneth Tyson, a middle-aged man who filmed the ambush and murder. Jimmy had no idea that Killer was stalking him as well. Jimmy left shortly after finding and executing his prey. But then, Killer intercepts Jimmy and they engage in a gunfight. Jimmy escapes without harming anyone, even Killer, who knows that Jimmy only kills his target and never harms anyone unrelated to his revenge quest. This has an impact on Killer's philosophy and causes him to become more personal about the work. Following that, Jimmy paid a visit to his ex-girlfriend, who is aware that he is killing the people in the video. At first, the woman appeared upset that Jimmy had simply ignored her. Jimmy claimed he had to do everything to protect her and his unborn child. With tears in her eyes, the woman tells Jimmy that she has aborted their unborn child and plans to start a new life with another man to find happiness. After clearing things up, she wishes him well, and Jimmy rushes off to begin his revenge mission. Jimmy discovers his next target, a man named Hovis Nixon, at a Nevada strip club, and engages in a fierce battle with him. Jimmy manages to knife him and flees the scene. The next day, Jimmy learns from the radio newscast that Nixon is alive and in critical condition in the hospital. Knowing this, Jimmy turned around to finish his task. Meanwhile, Humphreys goes to the hospital, believing Jimmy would be there to assassinate Nixon. On the other hand, Killer's client notifies the man of Jimmy's whereabouts, who is on his way to the hospital to kill his victim. When Jimmy arrived at the hospital, he went directly to the surgery room. Jimmy executed Nixon without mercy right there. Humphreys rushed over after hearing gunshots to see Jimmy flee. He instantly pursues Jimmy and they engage in a shootout, causing damage to the lighting system. Jimmy managed to corner Humphreys and point his gun at him. But then, Jimmy simply vanished after the lights went dark since, by principle, a person would not harm anyone who was not his target. After successfully escaping from the hospital, Jimmy drives his automobile at high speeds until he finds he is being pursued by Killer. A high-speed chase on the highway is unavoidable. Jimmy uses his ability as a driver to corner Killer. When Jimmy has the opportunity to terminate Killer, he shoots his car tire rather than killing him. Unlike Jimmy, who is just concerned with killing his targets, Killer, as a hitman, must finish his assignment. He fired a shot at Jimmy but missed, barely striking his neck. After a chase with Killer, Jimmy goes to his parents' house with the intention of killing his father. Jimmy claims that his father planned to kill him and his brother Gary after they refused to split the money they took during a bank robbery. While healing Jimmy's wounds, Jimmy's mother tries to persuade him that his father would never do such a thing because everyone knows how much his father adores Gary, even more than he does Jimmy. So it's unthinkable that his father premeditated the death of his beloved son. Jimmy immediately recognized that Gary's girlfriend was most likely the one who set them up. Following that, Jimmy resumed his mission to assassinate his final target, Alexander Jared, who now works as a traveling missionary. Along the route to carrying out his revenge mission, Jimmy frequently listens to radio broadcasts about Jared's spiritual lectures about evil crimes such as robbery, murder, and revenge, as well as the perils of revenge and hatred that rises in the chest. Meanwhile, the cops appear to praise Humphreys for cornering Jimmy and hunting him down. Humphreys tells Detective Cicero that Jimmy's victims were involved in a robbery, and just one person survived. Humphreys then went to stop Jimmy from killing the man. Not just Humphreys, but Killer appears to be on his way there after receiving information from his client. Jimmy visits the place where Jared is preaching and is met by a large number of worshippers who appear to be impacted by the preacher's content, despite the fact that he was previously a thief and murderer. It revealed out that Jared was aware of his buddy's murders and had purposefully lectured Jimmy about retribution and retaining hatred on the vehicle radio. Jared then brought Jimmy outside, away from the crowd. Jared tears, imploring Jimmy to forgive him, revealing that he has repented and changed his life. Jimmy pointed his rifle at Jared, but after hearing all of his admissions and quite sincere apologies, Jimmy decided to keep the man alive and returned to where Jared was speaking. Jimmy sat alone, reflecting on his crimes and sins. Shortly after, Killer arrived and pointed a gun at Jimmy, who was looking at images of the targets he had slain. Killer then informs Jimmy that he will carry out his assignment to kill him. But first, Killer claims that there is one more gang member who is responsible for the deaths of Gary and his colleagues. Someone who knows Jimmy would come for vengeance and orders Killer to kill him. Meanwhile, Detective Cicero discovers that there is one more person engaged in the incident that murdered Gary and uncovers the true name of the man who shot Jimmy. She dashed to where Jared was preaching to apprehend the man. As Killer and Jimmy square off, Humphreys goes inside and aims a gun at Jimmy. Humphreys then shoots him in the head, indicating that he was the one who shot Jimmy in the video and was responsible for the murder of Gary and his gang. Humphreys hears from Gary's girlfriend about their successful theft and plans to steal the loot. The killer then raced out of the room. Humphreys pursued him and offered him money for his efforts, but Killer refuses, telling Humphreys not to contact him again. Humphreys assumed everything was finished and contacted his wife, who turned out to be the informant, Gary's girlfriend. However, Jimmy shoots the man, who appears to survive thanks to the metal plate inserted in his skull. The video concludes with Detective Cicero arriving on the scene after Jimmy leaves, and the woman covering up Humphreys' involvement. Jimmy then scatters Gary's ashes in the sea and heads out into the sunset, as Jared begins a sermon on forgiveness. Hatred and vengeance will ultimately bring suffering, not only to the target but also to the person harboring it. Forgiving is extremely tough, especially when we are harmed by someone, causing our bodily and mental well-being to suffer. However, sometimes letting go of all our resentment and grudges is the only way to go forward in life and achieve inner and exterior serenity.